Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. After my husband died, his family kicked me out of the house, but they had no idea what I was cooking for them. My name is Grace Mitchell, I am 45 years old, and for more than 20 years, I was the wife of an exceptional man, Jonathan Mitchell. He wasn't perfect, he could be absent-minded, sometimes stubborn, but he was deeply good, loyal to the bone, hard-working, and above all, he loved me with a simple love as solid as a rock. Not with grand theatrical declarations, but with constant gestures, sincere attentions, silences full of respect. We met at the end of our studies. He was fresh out of Georgetown Law School, still wearing his threadbare suit that he wore too often, with that bright look of someone who knows they're about to change their lives. I was finishing my studies at the Culinary Institute of America in New York. I remember the exact day our paths crossed, a rainy Saturday, at an alumni conference where we were both present, almost by mistake. He had ordered a black coffee and a bagel, which I had gently criticized for its lack of taste. He had laughed, a little embarrassed, then said to me, "So you must be a chef or something." I answered him, with a wry smile. "And you must be a lawyer, but not very good at breakfast." We sat down together. We never left. From the first day, I knew I would never meet another man like him. There was a rare gentleness about him, a way of truly listening. He never talked about himself before listening to others. And above all, he looked at me as if I were a miracle in his life. Me, a girl from a working-class neighborhood, with my grandmother's recipes, my hidden ambitions, and my hands always full of the smell of onions and melted butter. The first few years were hard. Very hard, in fact. We lived in a tiny studio apartment in Silver Spring, above an old garage that smelled of gasoline and damp. He studied late, I worked early. He worked at the office of a small, poorly paid lawyer, and I worked in restaurant kitchens where I was barely seen. There wasn't much, except our determination. But every day, we came home with smiles, happy to be together. We shared a bowl of soup, a piece of bread, and he told me that my cooking had the power to make you forget your fatigue. Then, little by little, things improved. He climbed the ladder, and so did I. We saved every penny, refused unnecessary outings, and gave up vacations. And after years of patience, we were able to buy our house, a small red brick house in a quiet Maryland neighborhood, with a wooden porch that Jonathan painted himself, and a vegetable garden in the back that I planted with my own hands, tomatoes, basil, mint, lavender. And at the heart of this house, there was my kitchen, my sanctuary. I would get up there at 5 a.m. to knead bread, prepare preserves, test sauces, and invent desserts. Jonathan loved to taste my dishes in advance. He would close his eyes, put down his fork slowly, and whisper, "My wife is a treasure that the world does not yet know." But this happiness, this simple and sincere life, were not to his family's taste. From the very beginning, Jonathan's mother, Margaret Mitchell, had judged me. She hadn't even tried to hide her contempt. During our very first meeting, she had given me a scrutinizing look, from head to toe, as if she were evaluating an object in a display case. Then, turning slightly towards her son, she had whispered, in an acid tone, "A simple stove?" But I heard that whisper. And even though Jonathan tried to defuse the situation with a tight smile, the discomfort was already there. Settled. Like an invisible tablecloth on the table. Margaret was one of those women shaped by appearances and social traditions, impeccable Chanel suits, silver hair tied back in a bun, and lips always painted a cold red like steel. She came from a world of country clubs, of charity receptions, of marriages between respectable families, a world where you never asked too many questions, but where every detail, the brand of your bag, the way you pronounced words, the way you held your glass, was judged. Classified. Labeled. And I, Grace Mitchell, born Grace Taylor in a working-class neighborhood of Baltimore, black woman, daughter of a mechanic and a nurse, trained by the sweat of my brow in the hot kitchens of restaurants. I didn't tick any of her boxes. She never told me frankly what she thought. She preferred the language of silence. Raised eyebrows. Little smirks. Exaggeratedly discreet sighs. She spoke to me like talking to an employee, not to a daughter-in-law. Never any questions about my work, my dreams, my family. Only instructions, and sometimes, condescending remarks disguised as compliments. This apple pie, it almost looks like the one from the club's caterer. It's adorable. Jonathan's older brother, Robert, was just as icy, but in a different way. He almost never looked me in the eye. His world was numbers, contracts, investments. I was just an anomaly to him, a dissonant note in the well-orchestrated symphony of the Mitchell family. He would greet me with a distracted nod, then immediately return to his phone or his discussions about the financial markets. Sometimes, during family dinners, I would feel his gaze slide over me, not like a man's gaze, no. A listener's gaze, which assesses the profitability of an element in a structure. And very clearly, in his mind, I was not a good investment for Jonathan. And then there was Camilla, the younger sister. More subtle, more cunning. Always smiling, always polite, but venomous. She mastered the art of contempt disguised as elegance. She threw me sentences that, on paper, seemed kind, but which stung like needles under the skin. You're a really good cook, Grace. It's rare to see so much passion in someone who didn't go to college. Or again. It's great to have you here. You bring a kind of rustic warmth to family events. It's authentic. Each time, I responded with a smile. A smile that I forged with the strength of my dignity. Despite all this, I have always remained respectful. At every dinner party, every birthday, every Thanksgiving, I was there. Punctual. Present. Helpful. I cooked, I set the table, I served the food, I cleaned up afterward. I prepared their favorite dishes, I listened to their conversations without ever imposing myself, I tried to make myself small, very gentle. Not out of submission, but for the love of Jonathan. Because I wanted him to have a united family, even though I knew I would never really be a part of it. I thought that in time, they would come to see who I really was. Not a threat. Not a mistake. But an honest, upright woman, passionate about her art, loving towards their son and their brother. A woman worthy of being treated with respect. More, I was never good enough for them. Not classy enough. Not educated enough. Not suitable enough. And above all, I knew it deep down, not white enough. They never said it. They didn't need to say it. Everything in their looks, their silences, their veiled gestures screamed it to me. It was there, in every implied comparison, in every recounted memory of a former girlfriend of Jonathan's, Catherine, do you remember? She was so cultured, so graceful. And yet, I never folded. Because in my husband's eyes, every night, I saw what my love was worth. And that was enough to lift me up, again and again. And then, one day, the sky fell on my head. It all started quietly, like a shadow in the corner of a room. Jonathan had lost a little weight, but people thought it was stress, overwork. He was working on a big file, spending hours in the office, skipping meals. Nothing to worry about, they thought. But the weeks passed, and his fatigue became heavy, unusual. His complexion had paled. His smile, once bright, often seemed distant, frozen. One night, he collapsed in pain in the middle of the night, awakened by a cramp so intense that it brought tears to his eyes. I had never seen this man cry. Not for failure, not for loss, not even at his father's funeral. There, he was broken. We consulted first a general practitioner, then a gastroenterologist. He underwent a series of tests, MRIs, biopsies. Each appointment was a little more distressing than the last. Then one morning, in a harshly lit office, a doctor with a closed face uttered the words no wife should ever hear. Pancreatic cancer. Advanced stage. Liver metastases. I didn't understand right away. Or rather, my mind refused to understand. Jonathan, however, remained calm. Too calm. He just squeezed my hand, tightly. I felt my heart crush against my ribcage. From this day forward, the weather has changed. Texture days became battles. Nights became vigils. Every minute counted, and every smile a miracle. He tried chemotherapy. They tested an experimental protocol at Johns Hopkins Hospital. He had some faith in it. I had a lot. But the results were still cruel. The cancer progressed faster than the treatments. He was losing weight visibly. His hands, once large and warm, had become thin, bony, almost fragile. He was cold all the time. So I knitted him socks, prepared mild broths and soups that he struggled to swallow. I refused to send him to the hospice. I wanted him to stay home, in our cocoon, in our story. Where every wall had seen our love grow. Where I could still smell the bread he loved, or the scent of rosemary on the windowsill. I transformed myself into a nurse. A guardian. A sentinel. I learned to read his silences, to recognize the pain he no longer dared to name. I got up every 2 hours to give him his medication. I sat by his bedside, sometimes in silence, sometimes reading him the books he loved. We listened to soft music, often jazz, like on our first dates. Sometimes he apologized. "I'm sorry, Grace. I didn't mean to put you through this." And I stroked his forehead and replied, "You didn't make me experience anything. I live with you. Until the end. You're still the strongest man I know." He smiled at me weakly. And that smile was worth all the strength in the world. The day he left, it was beautiful outside. Ironically. A blue sky, almost cruel. The house was silent. He had been sleeping a lot for the past few days, because of the morphine. And then, without noise, without drama, he simply stopped breathing. I rested my head against his chest. There was nothing there. Just a vast emptiness. A deep cold passed through me. Not the cold of winter, but the cold of loss. I lay there for hours, unable to move, unable to cry. As if my body refused to admit that the man I had loved for over 20 years was no longer there. When he died, a part of me died with him. Not just the woman. Not just the wife. But the partner, the confidant, the one who existed in his gaze. Without him, I was no longer sure of who I was. I was empty. Hollow. Silent. But what I didn't know yet was that the pain I had experienced was not at the beginning. I thought I had lost everything. More, the worst was yet to come. The day after the funeral, when my heart hadn't even had time to understand Jonathan's absence, his family arrived. It was barely 10 o'clock in the morning. I was still in my black dress, sitting in the kitchen, a cold cup of tea in my hands. The house was silent, almost sacred. The flowers sent for the funeral still filled the living room with their scent. I thought they had come to talk. To cry. To remember him, together. But when I saw Margaret Mitchell walk through the door in her perfectly ironed charcoal suit, followed by Robert with closed eyes, and Camilla, dressed to the nines, my stomach knotted. And when a man in a suit, whom I didn't know, joined them with a briefcase in his hand, I understood that it wasn't a condolence visit. It was an execution. They settled into the living room as if they were at home. Margaret crossed her legs, standing as straight as a marble statue. Robert stood with his arms crossed, as if surveying a scene. Camilla stared at a vase, carefully avoiding my gaze. The silence lasted an eternity. Then Robert spoke. His voice was sharp, without emotion. "The house is in Jonathan's name alone. He has never changed the deed." I blinked, as if his words were blows. "Pardon?" I whispered. The lawyer opened a file, took out copies of documents, the property deed, Jonathan's birth certificate, everything needed to erase my legal presence with a stroke of paper. "He didn't leave a will," Camilla added, still without looking at me. "And legally, everything goes to the family. You have no rights here, Grace." I froze. Jonathan had promised. Several times. He told me. I'll take care of it this week, darling. I'll put your name on the house. It's a formality. But between work, fatigue, then the illness that had devastated him, he never had time. I stood up slowly, my throat tight, my heart pounding. You're kicking me out? I whispered. Margaret spoke for the first time. Her voice, seemingly gentle, was icy. You're not legally married to this house, Grace. And we have to protect Jonathan's estate. You understand, don't you? Non. Didn't understand. I didn't understand how, after 20 years of building this life, of building this home brick by brick, of loving their son with all my being, I could be treated like an intruder. Then Margaret continued. We'll give you 48 hours to pack your bags. She gave a small wave, as if thanking me for my services after a contract was completed. Camilla stood up, headed to the bedroom, and returned a few minutes later, with a suitcase. My suitcase. The one I used for our weekends in the countryside. We have prepared some things for you. I couldn't answer. The words stuck in my throat, crushed by the silent violence of the scene. I felt transparent, useless, destroyed. They left as they had come. Without a tear. Without a moment's hesitation. And I stayed there, alone, standing in the empty living room, with a suitcase in hand, in front of what had been me home, my sanctuary, my life for more than 20 years. Everything still smelled of Jonathan, his jacket lying on the back of the armchair, his watch on the nightstand, his perfume in the air. But the law, cold and blind, had just erased me from its world. After being kicked out of my own home, I had nowhere to go. All my things, my memories, my entire life, locked into a single suitcase. Angela, my lifelong friend, reached out to me without question. She welcomed me into her small apartment above a hair salon in the working-class neighborhood of Brooklyn Heights. The accommodation was modest, a main room, a tiny kitchen, a bed against the wall, and a window overlooking a noisy alley. But it was a roof. A bit of warmth in a freezing cold. I couldn't sleep anymore. I tossed and turned at night, haunted by the emptiness left by Jonathan, and by the brutal injustice of her family. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Margaret handing me that suitcase. I relived this scene like a repeated slap, a betrayal that robbed me not only of my husband, but me dignity. For some weeks, I remained prostrate. I ate almost nothing. The taste had left me, and with it, a part of me. I, who had always believed that cooking was a language of love, no longer had the strength to lay my hand on a pan. I was nothing more than a shadow. Angela gave me space, but I could feel her concern. She brought me cups of tea, small meals, and gently encouraged me. Grace, you need to come to your senses. You still have light. You just need to turn it back on. But I didn't believe her. I thought I was finished. And then one evening, while I was curled up on the sofa, the television on without me really listening to it, a cooking show caught my attention. It was a competition. Chefs competed to create a dish from simple ingredients. One of them talked about his grandmother, the recipes she had passed on to him, and what cooking represented: memory, home, love. And there, something has rekindled in me. A thrill. A spark. It was discreet, fragile, but real. I got up. I opened the tiny fridge. There was almost nothing: an onion, 2 eggs, a little milk, some leftover bread. But my hands began to move on their own, as if driven by a memory stronger than grief. I made French toast, like I used to make for Jonathan on Sundays when he stayed in bed. And as I tasted the first bite, the tears came. Not tears of sadness. Tears for connection. I wasn't dead. Not entirely. And the only thing that could bring me back to life was the kitchen. This is how it was born. Grace cooks. At first, it was just a little note written on a piece of paper that I taped to the window of Angela's hair salon. Private chef, intimate dinners, birthdays, brunches at home. Warm, heartfelt, home-style cooking. The beginnings were timid. 1 or 2 calls. Small events, birthdays of elderly couples, brunches with colleagues. I would arrive with my utensils in an old rolling bag, prepare everything in the client's kitchen, then discreetly leave, with a tip and smiles. Every dish I created carried a story. A memory. A piece of me. And people felt it. My braised beef with cardamom, my cinnamon and preserved lemon chicken, my rustic salted caramel tarts, everyone wanted to know more. My dishes spoke for me, better than I ever could have. Word of mouth started spreading. Then the calls poured in. Within a few months, I was back. Not in their world, no. In mine. I had rebuilt myself with my pots, my herbs, my sauces. I had given meaning to my life, one bite at a time. And then one day, the phone rang. "Hello, Camilla Mitchell here. I've heard about your services. I'm hosting a gala fundraiser, and I'd love to hire you for dinner." I stood there frozen. Camilla. She had no idea who was behind it. Grace Cook's my name, my face, my existence. She had erased them from her memory, like one erases an error in a table of accounts. But I hadn't forgotten anything. I didn't tremble. I didn't hang up. I answered him in a soft, calm, professional voice. "My pleasure, Mrs. Mitchell. Send me the details. I will be happy to serve you." A few weeks after the call, Camilla Mitchell sent me the event brief, a lavish private reception to celebrate the launch of his partnership with a French luxury cosmetics brand. A prestigious dinner, 25 hand-picked guests, investors, influencers, a few media faces, and, of course, his family. She specified. "I've heard you do very refined fusion gastronomy. I want something elegant, but original. Not too busy, not too classic either. And it has to impress." Her voice was dry, directive, without recognition, as if she were speaking to any caterer. She had no idea that it was me. That it was Grace, the woman she had helped throw out of her own home, like forgotten luggage. I accepted, without trembling. But inside, I was already cooking. The reception took place in a mansion located in the upscale district of Mount Vernon, in the historic heart of Baltimore. White columns, marble staircases, crystal chandeliers. A set straight out of a glossy magazine. The staff ran around, coordinated like a theater troupe. Everything had to be perfect. And I was the invisible leader behind the curtain. I arrived before sunrise. I had planned everything, calibrated everything. Every ingredient had been carefully chosen. Every cooking, every dish, every aroma, every sauce, carried a part of my memory. It was my story that I was going to serve at the table. The memory menu. Entrance, butternut squash velouté with roasted hazelnuts and sage oil. A sweet, warm recipe that Jonathan loved in the evening's autumn. A soup that spoke of intimacy, of simplicity assumed. Margaret tasted it, then asked for a second plate. Plat principal, veal medallion with morels, sweet potato puree and red wine reduction with juniper berries. A variation of a dish that Jonathan suggested to me one rainy evening, between 2 glasses of wine. He had told me. "Imagine that in a Michelin-starred restaurant, Grace. You belong there." Of a James Beard Award. This dish was our shared ambition. And that evening, Robert whispered. "Delicious. Refined." Without knowing that he was eating a creation born from our love. Dessert, dark chocolate fondant, sweet chili and hibiscus pearls. A merger between sweetness and fire. Between tenderness and bite. All I had felt for a year. Camilla found it stunning. At the end of the meal, when applause began to erupt among the guests, Camilla came to get me backstage. "You did a wonderful job. The guests are delighted. You should come and introduce yourself. I want to see you." I looked at her without saying anything. Then I put on my chef's jacket, slowly smoothed down the white collar, and tied up my hair. And I walked into the room. The conversation died out instantly. Heads turned. And the silence flowed like lead. Margaret, sitting by the fireplace, froze her hand in the air, a fork suspended between heaven and earth. Grace? She breathed, her mouth half open, her gaze empty. Robert sat up in his chair. Camilla took a step back. I scanned the room slowly. Not with hate. Not with rage. With a peace that I had given myself. Then I spoke, calmly, my voice clear, calm, without trembling. For 20 years, I fed this family. In the shadows. With love, with care, with consistency. And even after I was driven from my home, I never stopped honoring the memory of the man you lost. This meal, tonight, was for him. I didn't come back for revenge. I came back for remind me who I am. Not a word was spoken after that. Just silence, heavy, stunned, helpless. And I left again. Head held high. Heart at peace. My company, Grace Cooks, is today one of the most requested on the East Coast. I have served ambassadors, stars, and even modest families. Each dish I serve bears my signature, that of a woman who fell, then rose again, transformed. I published a book. The Taste of Resilience. He doesn't just talk about cooking. He talks about courage. Humiliation. Rebirth. I give lectures now. On the silent dignity, on the art of not taking revenge, but get up. And with my savings, I bought a house. In the same street than the one from which I had been expelled. A brighter, bigger, more beautiful house. I named it Jonathan House. I never forgot what they did to me. But I don't need their validation anymore. Because today, I feed on my strength. And them. They know what they have lost.